There are many elements to Star Wars that are endlessly debated by fans of the franchise, both inside and outside of the stories told within them. But perhaps one of the most misunderstood aspects of the series is just how the Force works and what falling to the dark side really entails. Because simply put, the dark side of the Force is not like dark magic in Harry Potter, where wizards can use some pretty dark spells and be absolutely fine. Any use of the dark side pushes one further and further down a path that is to be avoided at all cost. And today, I'd like to try and explain as plainly as I can just how the dark side of the Force works and what it's actually like when one falls to it. And needless to say, there will be spoilers for anything and everything Star Wars ahead, at least George Lucas Star Wars. So if you're not entirely caught up on that, you might not want to proceed any further. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so as I explained in my video on the Jedi, which you can find a link in the description to, Star Wars is based off classic tales of black and white morality, and therefore the Force, which is the basis for everything in the universe, is only made up of the light and the dark, or the good and the bad, and there is absolutely no gray area to be had here, only the pure good and the pure evil. Now obviously people can definitely be different shades of gray and are shown many times to be just that. But that's only for those lucky enough not to be force sensitive, because that means the dark side can't influence them to any meaningful degree. And for those who are, that's why training to be a Jedi is so important. Because, to put it simply, it is almost impossible to truly conquer the dark side of the Force, because it appeals to the evil nature that exists inside every person. And this is why balance, or as I prefer to call it, optimum efficiency, in the galaxy is only achieved when the dark side of the Force is acknowledged to exist, but nobody is using it. Because as I explained in the aforementioned video, the two sides of the Force are meant to reflect the duality of man, and how everybody is better off when they accept that they have an evil side but don't use it, thereby allowing everyone to benefit as a result. But, as anybody with even a basic understanding of human nature will already know, that's a lot easier said than done, which is why Jedi training is so vigorous, thorough, and strict. Because as Yoda explains in The Empire Strikes Back, the dark side of the Force is not any stronger than the light. It's just way more seductive and allows one to unlock their Force powers a lot faster. To use an analogy, one needs to exercise in order to maintain a healthy body, but exercising requires a lot of discipline as they need to do it on a regular basis, watch what they eat, and maybe endure a few things that they find unpleasant. But the results are a healthy, more comfortable body that'll live longer. Though at the same time, it's a lot easier to simply sit down all day and not exercise, and in a way is even more seductive and tempting, you might say. But if one chooses that path, it will inevitably end with them suffering health problems. In other words, while exercising may cause short-term discomfort, it leads to long-term satisfaction, while being lazy may lead to short-term comfort, but leads to long-term problems. And what can make it even harder is that one doesn't just exercise for 3 days and then never have to do it again. There's no kind of quota one has to meet and then they don't have to do it anymore. It's a lifelong commitment, which can only make being lazy seem even more appealing. George Lucas has even made similar comparisons to that in interviews. And tellingly, that's exactly how Jedi training works. They must learn to always be calm and rational, never act hastily or with anger, but with compassion and wisdom. And this is also why they renounce such things as attachments, so that they can always do the right thing no matter what may personally be on the line for them. And again, this training is hard to maintain and is a lifelong commitment, but the results are a lifetime of fulfillment and infinite wisdom. system. George Lucas has even said that the Jedi are meant to be the most morally good people in the galaxy, and this is due to their training allowing them to embrace the best parts of themselves while suppressing the worst. While on the flip side, giving in to their emotions would result in them slowly being destroyed by an evil force that seeks to use them as a puppet to carry out its work, because that's essentially what the dark side actually is. Or to put it another way, there's an episode of the Clone Wars TV series where Yoda is confronted by the physical embodiment of his evil side, and he's able to make it go away by simply saying that while he acknowledges it exists, it has no power over him. And that is ultimately the goal that every Jedi strives to achieve, to find the evil within themselves so that they can renounce and control it. But Yoda is able to go one better by also saying that he did briefly entertain his dark side once, but that he quickly found no use for it. In other words, Yoda was able to use logic in addition to his training to keep from falling to the dark side, because he understands that both sides of the Force offer up the same things. Only one gives wisdom and fulfillment, while the other only desires to control and destroy. So is it any wonder that he was able to conquer his dark side completely? Because again, in large part due to his advanced age, he's able to understand that the dark side can't give him anything that he can't already get in a much less self-destructive way with the light side, and that its promises are completely empty. But what about somebody who can't make this distinction so well? And that's what leads us to Anakin Skywalker. Now, I already went over his fall to the dark side in another video, which you can also find a link in the description to, but here I'd like to do something slightly different and explore every single facet of his fall. Because simply put, while he is partially responsible, there's no doubt about that, there's a lot of other factors that must be considered. And perhaps the biggest one of all is just how much he and Darth Vader are the same person, and therefore how much is Anakin responsible for Vader's actions? And the answer to that first part is that Vader is Anakin Skywalker's inherently evil side, artificially brought to the surface and strengthened a millionfold. Now, some would argue right off the bat that if Vader is Anakin's evil side, or that the dark side is simply enhancing the evil in Anakin that was already there, then that makes him responsible for Vader's actions. Only, I've never been a big fan of that argument whenever it's used in fiction, because it's honestly more complicated than that. And to use another analogy, even the healthiest human bodies have cancer cells in them. Because to keep it short, cancer is simply when the nucleus of a cell becomes screwed up. As in, instead of being, say, a normal skin cell that serves its host, it becomes parasitic in nature, feeding off of it. Now, given that the average human body has trillions of cells in it, it's basically a given that a few are going to get screwed up. It just so happens that the immune system is usually able to destroy these rogue cells before they can cause any damage, and cancer only results when said cells multiply beyond the immune system's ability to destroy it. But getting back to the analogy, let's say you have a human body that's as healthy as it can possibly be. Now once again, even this body will have a few cancer cells in it, just nothing that the immune system couldn't deal with in a snap. But say this body is exposed to intense radiation on its hand, where a cancer cell just happens to be, and as a result, said body ends up with severe cancer in its hand that's quickly spreading. Now in this case, what's actually to blame for the patient getting sick? The one cancer cell that was already there, or the radiation that allowed it to overwhelm the immune system? And pretty much anybody would say it was the radiation, because the cancer cell would have never gotten a foothold otherwise, and was artificially given the strength it needed to become a problem. And in essence, that's what the dark side does. It takes the evil or disease in somebody and artificially inflates it to make that person not only evil, but the absolute worst version of themselves at that. Because simply put, Anakin would have never done the things he does as Darth Vader. Even if he did have some issues, he had his evil side more or less in check, and it was only once the dark side got a hold of him that he started to do great evil. This is even why in Return of the Jedi, multiple characters, including Obi-Wan, almost refer to Anakin and Vader as two different people, because that's what they essentially are. Because again, one side is the good person he would normally be, and the other is his worst qualities overly inflated due to a terribly evil force. Now, I know this opens up a whole can of worms, because people would be quick to say, in the real world, if Anakin survived, he still would have been thrown in jail, because just saying, the dark side made me do it, or, I didn't do those things, it was Darth Vader, would never hold up in court. And I do agree that him dying after coming back to the light was the best way for his story to end at that point, as I got into in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too. However, one has to keep in mind that the dark side doesn't exist in the real world. There is no evil force that will bring out the most horrible version of yourself and compel you to do terrible things if you fall to it. Because if such a thing did exist, how responsible the person was before they fell is for the way they are now would make for an extreme moral dilemma, especially because when people claim in real life that evil forces did compel them to do horrible things and genuinely mean it, they're usually thrown in the loony bin and declared mentally unfit to be held totally accountable for their actions. So if that's the case when such forces arguably don't even exist, what would be the answer if they did? Because, as I also pointed out before with my cancer analogy, most people would be quick to blame the radiation rather than the cancer itself for it getting out of control. But then there's also the question of, what if the person in question was led to believe that the radiation would help them? Wouldn't the person who knowingly misled them be held even more responsible, as well as those who knew the radiation could be fatal and didn't properly warn them? And that's what both the Emperor and the Jedi are in this scenario. Because one has to keep in mind that Anakin didn't just come to trust the Emperor overnight. This man had been acting as his father figure and subtly pumping poisonous thoughts into his head for over 10 years. And the Jedi certainly didn't help because while they do emphasize how important it is not to fall to the dark side, they never make it perfectly clear why doing so is so dangerous. And that, coupled with them seemingly abandoning all their morals that Anakin does hold in very high regard, with just one example being his reluctance to kill Dooku, as well as his guilt and confusion after the fact when he's congratulated by the Jedi for doing it, instead of being reprimanded like he feels he should, makes him question if they really are supposed to be the good guys. And then there's of course the Emperor, who, as I just mentioned, is not only making him question the Jedi even further, but also glamorizes the dark side as some kind of forbidden fruit that can give him everything he ever wanted. And once again, the Jedi hadn't really done anything to properly quell that notion, simply saying that the dark side is to be avoided without explaining just how horrible falling to it really is. Now, don't get me wrong here. Obviously, Anakin is partially to blame for falling to the dark side, mostly because he didn't heed the no attachment rule and married Padme, which is what helped make him so susceptible to the Emperor's manipulations in the first place. Because ironically enough, for all the grief the Jedi get over some of their rules, if Anakin had just followed them, he probably would have never fell. Because they said he was too old to be trained, and sure enough, he never learned how to let go of certain people due to having already formed attachments, and his inability to let go of said attachments is what causes him to fall to the dark side. So the Jedi were ultimately right to have the rules that they did. It was just that by that point in the Order's existence, they weren't teaching this stuff properly anymore, to the point that they couldn't even see all the red flags that Anakin desperately needed help until it was already too late. But the rules themselves were definitely definitely the best way to keep from falling to the dark side. But the point here is, Anakin did play a hand in his becoming Vader, most definitely, but it can't be ignored just how many outside factors also led to that decision, up to and including the fact that he was led to believe at that point that it was genuinely the right thing to do. But getting back to the dark side itself, the point is that any usage of it, and I mean any, leads Force users closer and closer to falling to it and becoming the most evil, horrible versions of themselves. As Vader even makes clear in Return of the Jedi during his talk with Luke, the strength of the dark side is absolute, and once you fall to it, the good person you once were is not coming back. Because let's face it, a mortal man can't be stronger than the dark side of the thing that literally makes up all of existence. But then the question must be asked, if that is indeed the case, why is Anakin eventually able to break free of it and return to the light? And the answer to that mainly lies in the circumstances of how he fell to the dark side, because most Force users that fall are usually terrible people to begin with, and the dark side simply amplifies that evil from a 10 to 100,000, very much like the Emperor himself. And to use him as an example, if the dark side is giving him absolutely everything he ever wanted, why would he ever turn away from it? And for those who do turn with a noble purpose, it's usually not long before they lose themselves completely to the dark side, simply becoming a tool to do its evil bidding, with whatever good intentions they had becoming lost as they become more and more evil. And initially, this is what happens to Anakin. Falling to the dark side, coupled with the loss of the woman he loved, broke Anakin completely and leaves nothing but the most evil part of himself at the dark side's mercy, causing mayhem and destruction. But because the dark side enhances anything negative about those who embrace it, Anakin never fully goes away, as he manifests in Vader as extreme self-loathing and depression, and then his finding out that he has a son, as well as the Emperor making it clear that he's a dead man walking, causes that depression to not only increase, but for the dark side's hold on him to grow weaker as the good man that was Anakin starts to resurface more and more because it had never been completely destroyed to begin with. But, of course, the straw that finally breaks the camel's back is seeing his family's life once again on the line, begging him to help. And it's that unconditional love, the one thing the dark side has no defense against, that finally allows Anakin to break free of its hold on him. And it's honestly for a similar reason that the Jedi embrace love and compassion for all to such a degree, because not only does the light side encourage it, but it's the strongest defense against the dark side. Real, genuine love can conquer even the most powerful evil, and that's what finally is able to free Anakin from the dark side, and in the process destroy Vader and once again leave him as nothing but the weakest part of Anakin that he doesn't have any use for. So like I said before, to an extent Anakin is to blame for his actions as Darth Vader for falling to the dark side, but on the whole it's a lot more complicated than a lot of people make it out to be, to the point that it can be argued that since there is no real life equivalent to the dark side, at least none that we know of, that there is no real right answer to how accountable Anakin should be held for Vader's actions. What can be said for certain, however, is that he most definitely earns his redemption, considering how monumental his turning away from the dark side really is. Though what also doesn't help people's perception of this is its depiction in the sequels, where it's portrayed as much less influential in a person's actions and a lot easier to fight and come back from than George Lucas had ever intended. But the point here is, nothing good can ever come from the dark side of the Force. And I do mean nothing! The dark side is the corrupter of all that is good, and any use of it, for any reason, will invariably end in disaster for those who attempt it. Because unlike the light side of the Force, which can be controlled to an extent by those who are properly trained, the dark side only seeks to control those who use it. And that's how it always ends. As I said said before, a mere mortal who's a part of the Force itself could never even hope to control something so parasitic and powerful. And the fact that pretty much every Sith ends up having more or less the same goal, personality, and motivation only proves that. It's basically evil incarnate that compels those who embrace it to do terrible things, promising them power and emotional highs in exchange for doing its bidding. Almost like some kind of terrible, mind-controlling drug. And George Lucas himself has even compared it to a cancer when those who use the dark side become too powerful, because all it does is cause unwarranted misery and death. So as a result, is it really any wonder why the Jedi take such drastic measures to avoid falling to it? I mean, you see what one Jedi falling ended up doing. Imagine if that happened on a regular basis. So hopefully all of this has helped put into perspective just what the dark side of the Force really is, and just how much influence it has over those who use it. Because like I just got through saying, unlike what some people think, there is nothing good that can come from using it. George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars himself, has even plainly stated this. And the fact that somebody like the Emperor is what the dark side strives to turn everybody into, a selfish, power-hungry tyrant that brings murder, misery, and destruction upon everyone else, should more than be enough to prove that. And as the exercise versus lazy analogy also demonstrated, it's very easy for one to fall to it if they aren't careful. Though, as I addressed in one of the aforementioned videos, the word balance does imply that some sort of combination between the light and dark is the ideal combination, as it brings to mind a scale, which is why, as I noted before, I prefer to use phrases like optimum efficiency, because that more accurately describes how only in the absence of the dark side can harmony and peace be achieved. Because, like I said at the start, while there is a time and place for nuance in Star Wars, such as in Anakin's fall to the dark side, when it comes to the Force, there is only pure good and pure evil, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that should ever be glorified about the dark side. Because while it is seductive by nature, in the end it's nothing but a horrible abomination that should be reviled and avoided at all cost, both within and outside of Star Wars, for what exactly it represents. Okay, I think I've made my point with all of this quite clear. So now I'd like you to give me your opinions. Do you believe that the dark side of the Force is nothing but a terrible parasite that corrupts all who embrace it into the most horrible, evil versions of themselves that should in no way be glorified? Or do you still believe that it has its good points? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Because as I always say, you do not have to agree with any of the more opinion-based parts of this video if you don't want to. You can feel about this or any other topic we discuss here that you want to, and if you think I had it all wrong, that is completely fine. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all next time.